Hello. Today, I guess I was just going to talk about some of the stuff I've been rereading. I'm still going through Carl Jung stuff and, just taking my time though. No hurry. But what I did reread recently was The Picture of Dorian Gray. So Dorian Gray is the only full-length novel by Oscar Wilde, a romantic Irish author and poet. And he was a bisexual guy who he spent some time in jail for homosexual acts, and that was what really, while he was alive, that was really the focus rather than on his works, was that he had sex with men. But now that he's buried in France, and he's got this above ground what do you call the above ground, I need to relearn all the different specific names for the monuments and the types of things. Anyway, so they fenced his grave off because women were kissing it so much and leaving so much lipstick, and they didn't really want the grade to erode further and to just obviously protect it. But his poems are really great. I mean, it's really romantic, and romantic stuff really is a focus on nature, it's like what you think. You've got romance and you've got, reality. But romance is more like feeding these ideas of beauty. But also romantic, making dark and of these other kinds of things seem, painting a picture of sorrow emotionally with your words. So that's really kind of a feel for the romantic stuff. So at this point though, it was really one of my favorite. It's still one of my favorite all-time reads. So The Picture of Dorian Gray is about a guy who some guy is painting him for a portrait, and he's kind of like a normal gentleman. And one day they meet this English lord who just basically absolutely Dorian Gray feels enthralled by him. But it's not so much the sexuality as much as it is the intellect, and he just wants to know. And so the Lord tells him all about his philosophy of hedonism, and that the best things to do are just seek pleasure. That's all you need, okay? And he tells Dorian Gray all this stuff. Who believes him? So Dorian Gray wants so badly for that to be real, so he could pursue pleasure forever, that he makes some kind of it's not like. And the reason I'm talking about this is because this is the romantic era of Faust, and that's my favorite thing ever, as you could probably tell. But he really gets he has this dream kind of, instead of making a straight up deal with the devil, he just wishes for it to be true, that the portrait that has been painted of him will age and have illness, and not him though. So instead of Dorian Gray aging, his portrait does. Sickness, any of these things. So that happens, and Dorian Gray goes on to meet a woman who's an actress acting in on stage plays, and she's just so enthralled by Dorian Gray, that obsessed, we could say. She would do anything for him, give up anything, give up her identity, really these are people who are pretty much they all have dissociative identity disorder, or, you know, Dorian Gray's kind of narcissistic. And she does a play. She doesn't really do that great at it, though. So the British lord is chatting with Dorian Gray, and he says, "Oh yeah, if you're just not so enthralled and stuff by her, show me that you don't really care, and just dump her, get rid of her." And so he does. Dorian Gray breaks up with this lady who is just obsessed with him, so she kills herself. And it's not really like Dorian Gray kind of cares immediately. He really isn't too broken up about it. So he continues on. He has a lot of male lovers and female lovers. Now, Oscar Wilde was kind of like this in his actual life. I mean, his mom introduced him to all this literature, and he soaked it all up like a sponge, and he had some money, but he spent it faster than he could make it, and he wanted to have all the finest teas and be in all the best hotels and live in luxury, but he really wasn't that. And he got to have more and more luxury because people found him so charming and eloquent that they pretty much just supported him because they liked his art. So for Oscar Wilde, I would say it works out for him somewhat, but you know, he dies fairly young and of some type of infectious disease, and he spent some years in prison. It's just kind of sad. I mean, he really didn't have much contact with his children. So that's the little side story. They're very similar, I guess, obviously, because Dorian Gray is the brainchild of Oscar Wilde. So, and Oscar Wilde liked men and women. So, like, he also has male lovers, and he goes to, you know, he really likes essentially high class prostitutes, but he also likes, you know, whatever drinks and drugs he can get his hands on. And he just lives with this lord guy around sometimes, who is really just kind of like constantly telling Dorian Gray that he's not doing anything wrong. And for me, he's almost like an annoying character, but I know he's necessary for the story. So then Dorian Gray, one day he runs into the guy who painted him. And the guy, they have some kind of argument, and they look at the portrait that he painted of Dorian Gray, and the portrait is old and sick and vile looking. And the guy who painted Dorian gets freaked out, and he says, "What is this? This isn't natural, it's not right." And he freaks out, and Dorian Gray kills him. And he also kills, he doesn't really kill him. There's the woman who killed herself earlier in the story. Her brother comes after Dorian Gray, but he ends up dying in the forest of some kind of accident. So everybody who keeps meeting this Dorian Gray character, they're all kind of going all these different ways with misfortune. Well, as that goes on, there's really this for Dorian Gray. Now there's no, of course, living all that that way. There's not a lot of pleasure in addiction. That's the point for him. So now he decides, as he goes to his little retreat somewhere, and he thinks about, he has this conscious realization that this is addiction, that the way he's lived his life is wrong. And right before this happens, he does try to live his life the right way. He pursues a woman, and he treats her right. And he becomes a good citizen for a while. And then he looks back at the portrait, but it didn't get any younger, it didn't get any better. And he thinks that's because that he tried to be good for all the wrong reasons. He was just trying to be good to try to be good, not for the sake of goodness itself. So it doesn't save him. So then he thinks that there's no way out. We don't know if there would have been. And he takes a knife and he cuts the portrait up of himself. And later the servants find him, and it's like a very, very old looking man, all cut up, because when he cut the portrait up, he cuts himself up. And he finally is able to die. Now where the fuck he goes, nobody knows, you know. But it's a more of a modern day Faust, and Oscar Wilde, read his poetry, read the Portrait of Dorian Gray. It's fun to read, even though it's a flowery, of course, language. It's not boring like sitting through some of Crowley's readings and stuff. I need to take a nap or whatever kind of a feeling. This is really exciting, really romantic, really exciting. I recently watched a show called Penny Dreadful, you know, where they portrayed Dorian Gray as one of the characters, and so if you're into stuff like that, you would probably like that show. And then, you know, so I guess I'll talk about Faust a little bit. So Faust was possibly based off of a real guy who basically just went around medieval Germany and sold gadgets and promises and spells, and he was like a charlatan. But everybody just wanted they wanted this guy to help them. They believed in him, and even though people were always talking shit about him, people were always talking about how powerful and great he was. So it's kind of like that double-edged sword. Later on, in the later Middle Ages, we have Goethe. I hope I say that right. Somebody, I suppose I should just admit that I love all the German philosophers and stuff that much as well, but I can't pronounce any of it. So he writes about Faust, and that's, you know, even think about like Ghost Rider with Nicolas Cage, the modern day movie. That's just a retelling of Faust. It really is, and this is where Mephistopheles really comes from too. And this is a fantastic read. It's very exciting. It's got that language, but it'll make you think. It made me think for sure. Faust is a guy who he knows a lot of science, and he studied basically forbidden art and the occult for a long time. But he doesn't think that he has all the answers, and he wants to just have all the answers though. So he basically summons and it, you know, first it's like a dog, which reminds me of Agrippa, kind of a reference. And then it turns into Mephistopheles, shape-shifting. And Mephistopheles is just Satan incarnate, or Satan's Satan's friend, just like any kind of spirit from the Goetia. But that's what Mephistopheles is. But before that, Mephistopheles and God have this whole conversation, which is like the Bible. I mean, it's just borrowing from that, saying that Faust will give in to all these temptations, and that's just what he's going to do because it's human nature. And God says, no, I really think that he's going to find himself in a different way, and he won't need this kind of immediate gratification. So it's obviously put much more in a philosophical way that makes you think a lot, makes you think about all sides of the arguments here, or what is being presented. So that happens, and now Faust has Mephistopheles, by his side, and he has sold his soul. So that is another thing that's in popular culture. Because of Faust, you can, if you wanted something done, you could summon Satan, and Satan is going to take your soul when you die, but you get all this shit when you're alive. That idea. So then Faust and Mephistopheles have lots of talks. They travel around. Faust finds a woman, and he just it's like an obsessive relationship again, and she ends up killing herself. He goes around with all these other women, and nothing good happens to any of them, simply because they met Faust. And he does all the drinks and drugs he can get his hands on. And as he travels around, he shows people his magic tricks. Like, he's like, behold, I can do this for you. If you want this to happen, you want me to make your brother better, behold. And he snaps his fingers and does it. And he can even, he'll like summon different spirits that as he calls them, but it's just Mephistopheles making these things manifest. And even a king really likes him, some kind of royalty, likes Faust, and is just completely enthralled, and keeps him around for a while to perform his magic tricks and that kind of a thing. And this whole time, Mephistopheles and Faust are having debates. And in the end, there's two parts to Faust. It's really long. It's really a full-blown tragedy, if you will. He tries to repent, and he either goes to heaven or hell, whatever way you want to look at that. It's like because he strove to overcome his problems and realize that there's no such thing as complete satisfaction, he goes to heaven, or he dies, and now Mephistopheles kind of takes him away to hell. But there's these different actual endings. Now, the reason it's so popular, one of the people who is a candidate for possibly being William Shakespeare himself, because there's lots of different problems with Shakespeare, the person who might have been illiterate. So now we have these different. It's kind of like the JFK of the Middle Ages here, and we're just trying to figure that out. And so it's a lot of fun to debate these things, looking at it as a historian kind of a way. But Christopher Marlowe was an English, basically, playwright, and he knows a few languages, and he got a hold of Faust, which is in German, and he translated it, and he brings it to England. And England is just, it's Western culture. It's what Western culture needs, so it becomes a mass play. People put it on again and again. People read the story because it gets translated, and people are just buying this up. And so any of the upper class who can read, they are reading this. They're going to this play. And of course, British people go to America and spread it, and now we have the internet, so now everybody still knows about it. So that's kind of how that is. Thanks to Christopher Marlowe, and who could possibly be Shakespeare. There's other people, and possibly William Shakespeare was really the person who wrote those things. But it's just a fun, rabbit hole to go down, if you will. So what I want to take from Faust is just to mention that Carl Jung was obsessed with Faust. So that's kind of a thing that I really enjoy in a way. And the reason for that is what's beyond Faust, and the way, because it's such a classic, it applies to now. It's still going to be relevant in the future, because Faust is about instant gratification. But I'm talking about in modern ways. The internet, your fast food, drugs, and dating apps and all these things. Instant gratification is everywhere. And sometimes it seems like that's that's going to be what is going to fulfill you. You know, if you just go down that road, you're going to find this fulfillment. And it's hard to really say. Maybe to have that experience and know that it's not fulfilling is very valuable, but the other problem with that is that some people who they engage in that, they don't come out of that sane. And that speaks to Carl Jung's idea of the collective consciousness in a different way. This is all of us. Faust is me and Faust is you, because we all are having to pick and choose this, but it doesn't really seem like it. We're born into this kind of culture, and so is the collective consciousness. It's just removed and severed, because what Faust wants a primal connection to his soul. You know, when I talk about my psychic experiences and these things, that is a part of my mind, and it's a part of your mind that doesn't understand language, and it's primal. That's what it comes from. And that is not going to go away, because we've seen the way that the brain develops, and we have the temporal lobes evolve last to control impulses or regulate them. But the spiritual part of man, which is also primal and also instinct, that needs to feel this solidification of the ego, is going to be there. But when the spirit looks for the solidification, there's just McDonald's and the internet and drugs. That's all there is. It seems that way, you know, until you realize you have a conscious choice in the way you're going to conduct your life. So then you do those things, and there is no spiritual fulfillment. There's just loss, except for maybe gaining the knowledge that that's not right. So and you know what? Then it is kind of like saying, because we strive, we look at why. If we ask ourselves, what am I conscious about what I'm eating? Am I conscious about my behavior? Am I living my life? Like, if you're making choices, then you're really striving to meet that spirituality up with because science, which, I mean, Faust is talking somewhat about, this is the dawn of science. But we still have art, and art is just important as science for spiritual fulfillment. Science doesn't have an emotional answer. Science does not provide it doesn't quench your spiritual thirst. It's very important to supplement and understand your spirituality with that. But that's, for me, Faust is about striving to become better than the filth and that we're born into. Now, we all like, in some ways, this stuff, and we in some ways need it. But if you don't mindlessly just do it and you're not, it never has that conscious thought. But if you're picking and choosing that, then you have in a way really battled this whole Faust thing out, and you have evolved personally, spiritually, in some way that really matters, because then you're picking and choosing your life, and that's the best thing. That we have all these different levels. We have a government control community, obviously COVID going on, that kind of stuff, but you still have that personal control of your own life in some small way. We're all different, I understand, but there's still, you know, whatever element, whatever way that it can apply to your life, be Faust and keep searching. And, you know, so to me it's not really like some story about some guy who sells his soul to the devil and now he, you know, now he's in hell and that's the end of the story. It's a much deeper thing. And I like to say too, you know, if you're really into the Rosicrucian stuff, I really like that philosophy. It's kind of along the lines of Thelema and other types of, you know, Gnosticism, things like that. And it like focuses on the alchemical elements of transmutation and stuff. So, you know, if you take Faust and look at it in this literal type of way, then it kind of, literal personal way, then it really becomes, you know, me and you in a way where we're all these people. I mean, and if you want to take it a little step farther, Faust is, you know, subjective God. Faust is also subjective Satan, because through being a person, the spiritual is experienced itself subjectively through you. So the spiritual God consciousness is looking for answers, and in order to really look for the answers in a subjective way, then it has to be real. It has to be essentially have a human consciousness. Spiritual consciousness really matters too, but the spiritual wants to be physical, and that's just how it plays out in reality. So, you know, keep looking for the answers, pick and be mindful, and it's really great to be able to pick and choose what you want to do and the way you want to live your life. That is the best part, and that's the real freedom. Well, I probably bored the shit out of you guys, but I just wanted to tell you about some of my favorite readings, and I thought this was sort of an important thing. There's lots of things like Papa Legba, you know, the voodoo angle on, he's like presides over the crossroads. And Robert Johnson was a famous jazz musician who talked about selling his soul to the devil, but he was really referring to Papa Legba, but you know, the cultural differences there. So there's all these stories. You look, I mean, there's so many different versions of Cinderella in each country, kind of a thing. So it's really a lot of fun for me to look at all the different cultural stories. I love a good fairy tale. I love a good bedtime story. I just like a good story. So I'll see you guys later.